Okay, so tonight we have Jim Voelker here to talk about his experiences in Vietnam and his book, Mang Yang Pass. We also have Valerie Beal here, who is going to be our moderator. And I'm going to let Valerie take over, and she can give you her background first.
Hello there. The reason I was asked to do this tonight is that I host the Books and Beer Book Club at Circus across the street. And we did this, was November when you were our guest?
The first couple, when they're still at Black Cat.
Yeah, we started ages ago. Do you guys remember Hydro Street Brewing? That was a brief flash in the pan kind of a place, and then we went to Black Kettle, and now we're across the street at Circus. But Jim has been joining us at Books and Beer and talking about his writing process, since the beginning. And when we bring our authors in for our book club, we are able then to talk a lot about, how does this work? How does publishing work? And we've been along for the entire journey with him, and it's been very exciting to watch the production of this book from the very, very beginning to the actual, hold in your hand book, which is very exciting. So I'm local. I grew up in the Fall River area. I'm a Fall River grad, and then moved back here. I'm also an author myself, so it's been a delight to see this come to life. So what we'll do tonight is we're going to walk through just question and answers, and just talk about the history of the Vietnam War, and walk through some of the pictures that we've got. Some of these are historical photos, some are yours, and you'll be able to see these here. They're all up here on the screen. And please feel free to ask questions at any point. I've sort of divided the talk into different sections. But it would be wonderful if you have questions to ask when you've got them. We don't need to hold them until the end.
Right.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's the book cover. So I don't know about you. I graduated from high school in '86. And I don't remember really learning a lot about the Vietnam War in history class. I don't know if it was just too fresh, and I think that was part of it. I know a lot of our teachers in Fall River, a good number of them had served in the Vietnam War, and so this was educational for me, and I just really enjoyed learning more about this and understanding more about this area. So the title of the book is Mang Yang Pass, and when we talked in November, I was asking more about that pass and really how important it was to, it was really strategic. It had been strategic for years and years, and everybody's been fighting over it. I think that you guys, the entire time you were there, right? It was back and forth, and did you guys hold it the entire time?
We never held it. We never held the pass at all, only when we were on it, due to the fact that Mang Yang Pass was all mahogany trees and underbrush, triple canopy. You could only see about 5 feet when you got off the road. And the humidity would be great in the summer. The rainy season, you couldn't hardly move. But
Was it muddy?
yeah,
It mud?
Pleiku was clay,
Okay.
so it was like a cement on your feet. Guys would go around barefoot rather than wear boots because they were just too muddy. But it wasn't cold, the temperature wasn't such. But our transportation slowed way down. We had to carry chains to pull other trucks out,
Okay.
or we'd push them out. And the result is everything slowed down.
So I'm going to go to a map here now. So I'm trying to think if it's I don't think it's the next one. So this is the map of there. Was further up in the middle, right?
Yep.
Mang Yang Pass?
It's on the other side. It's actually, Pleiku was almost into Cambodia.
I wonder if we'll be
It
able
was
to see
about
that.
15 miles from Cambodia, from what I could tell.
So it was north of Pleiku?
No, our base was in Pleiku.
Pleiku? Okay, so that's right there. And then the Mang Yang Pass was between you and the coast?
The ocean.
Okay, so here to here. So for everybody on this side,
Mm-hmm.
plate crews here, and then when they would run on their missions out to the coast, they would go that way through the.
That was one run. We also went down to Long Bend. That was where they had the most supplies.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that.
And we had to, we carried our scrap metal out with us. And we actually carried our own jet out. We wouldn't turn our jet over to any transportation company. We, 573rd would carry out all its own jet people. And there was a procession to it. Because guys from each unit would come along, and it was called bath processing. They would actually process the body, fill it with, push out the blood, and get it ready for cremation, or they put it in a casket made of tin, and they'd actually solder the casket shut to be sent home overseas.
Did you go out take that to the ship, or was it helicoptered out?
We just took it to Long Bend, and it was put on a ship from there.
On a ship, okay.
Did they fly the bodies home, or did they put them on a ship and do it
They
that
put
way?
them on a ship, and the ship would have like a big refrigerator. But they've already been, their blood had already been pumped out. It was fast processing, they called it. Actually, dried blood comes out, looks like worms.
So some of these are your pictures. So is this one yours? Is this,
That picture is
Yeah.
two core right there. That's,
explain what 2 Corps was.
two core is like the capital of the Highlands. And this is the place that was the headquarters. The CIA was in there, Special Forces were in there, my Sergeant O'Reilly was in there.
Did you go there much?
Well, we're actually driving past it there. I was in there a few times, not a lot, with getting my sergeant stuff.
Right.
He made me his kind of like his chaperone when I was running around with him. But he got shipped home about 5 months after I was there. 5, 6, 7 months, something like that.
Well, and one thing I wanted to know about, so you, obviously the draft was in effect, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you turn 18, all the young men had to register, right? Is it at 18? Is that how it worked? So then you were still in high school when you received the draft notice?
No, it was,
Afterwards?
as they changed it from a draft to a lottery,
Oh,
and
okay.
the lottery got me right away.
Sorry.
The lottery got me right away. I got out of high school in June. By January, I was in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and we were doing basic training. They came in and said, "You guys listen up, because you're going." They knew right away we were going over. And they gave me special training. I went to Fort Eustis, I did amphibious training, and I did map reading, chart reading. You can be halfway around the world and they'll give you a chart. You can be 20 miles off the road and that chart will show you every hill and stream. And you couldn't believe how accurate it was. We had to read these charts. If we had 20 or 30 guys, we were going to go up a hill or around a hill, or how far we were into this area, we had to chart that out. And we charted it out by counting how many steps we took. If you took 10 steps, that was called a click. And you'd have 2 or 3 guys counting clicks. Nowadays it's done with satellites, I believe.
That makes sense. But not everybody's stride is the same.
Well, that's what we compare.
Okay.
And if you're going to bring in artillery, you bring in smoke to start with. You wouldn't fire for effect until you had your position figured out.
I gotcha. Did you have a question?
Jim, didn't you tell me that you won the lottery? That the first number that came up was your birthday?
Yeah, I won the lottery. The only thing I ever won. I turned it on and I turned it off in about 2 minutes. I couldn't figure out how they did something like that to a nice guy like me. But I was in and out, and today I have full medical with the VA. I don't get any bills. I've got some other veterans benefits. But it took 10 years to get into the VA. My wife was a nurse at the VA, and she said, you don't go in and ask them. You go around to urgent care and you tell them you're coming into the VA, and if they don't like it, you go in anyway. The urgent care can't turn you down. That's where this got happened.
So you had mentioned, here, I'll do this.
You had mentioned that you know, went to Corps in this like general area a few times. You were there for a year or
Yes.
so? Okay, exactly a year? Is that when they?
A
is
year
that-
and a couple days.
Okay, so that's basically it. You knew you were going to be there for a year, and then
That was your tour.
okay, and then people re-upped.
They wanted you to.
Yeah.
I had already lost a third of my, after a year, they told me to take a medical. I'd already lost a third of my body weight. I had boils, I had giardia, kidney infections, and I didn't know it. I hadn't known I lost a third of my body weight. Our clothes were so raggedy we didn't fit into much of anything. Anyway, they discharged me at Fort Lewis, Washington, and they told me I had to go to Fort Hood, Texas to get medical treatment. They did it that way, so none of this was on my military records. I was a civilian when I got to Fort Hood, Texas.
Oh.
So if I applied for any kind of medical disability, they could turn it down. Army's pretty sharp about that. They know how to get rid of you. They called us throwaway soldiers.
How long were you in Fort Hood then?
Oh, about a month. That's where everybody got cycled through. A lot of guys were there were right out of Vietnam. They did that in World War II. World War II was where they took all the wounded people from World War II. It's a big medical center down there. Fort Hood is huge. I don't think I even saw half of it.
Did they actually give you medical treatment while you were there?
Oh yeah, they gave me medical
Okay.
treatment, yeah.
I'm gonna go to
But the medical treatment is a lot better today for the vets.
I think this is just the same area, that same road. Or not?
Well, those are Mountain Yard people on foot. Those are the indigenous tribes.
So tell us a little bit about that. Is it, has anyone here read the book yet? Do you have? So I was a little surprised, and maybe you guys were too, about the, I'd never heard the Montagnard
Yep.
people, and they fought with you, yes?
They were the natives, and we hired them to show us the neighborhood. They knew all the paths. Very backward people. They ate raw fish. They'd actually eat fish like a bird would. They stick the head down their mouth and swallow it.
Yum.
Everything. They never popped its eyes out or scaled it or anything. They ate the whole thing. I watched them do that a couple times.
So they were
Generally outside, you know, the more, you know, populous areas, right?
Oh yeah.
And they farmed, or pretty much, right? But they were helpful otherwise? I mean, they showed you, you know, the different paths and stuff. I mean, did they actually fight with you alongside?
Somewhat.
Yeah.
They weren't the best fighters because the weapons were just too big for them. You ever see a little kid walking around with his dad's boots on? The boots are about 10 times too big for him. That's what the Mountain Yard people looked like, because they were, a big Mountain Yard person was 100 pounds, maybe 4'11", 4 foot. That would be a tall one. very dark skinned, they were always out in the sun. And in the Vietnamese language, or the Vietnamese tradition, they liked light skin. They did not like the Mountain Yard people because they had dark skin. And they were very willing to push them off their property. And a lot of them were slaughtered.
So tell me what this is.
That's like a restaurant.
Okay.
That's rice bread. You could go in there and get a hamburger.
Is this part of the past?
That's Mang Yang Pass. As you can tell by the sides, we had burned it pretty badly on both sides. We napalmed it a couple times.
Well, that was for your protection, right? So that you could see.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
And
oh,
the hilltops were where the North Vietnamese lived. They didn't come down unless it was nighttime.
would they shoot at you guys from up there?
Oh, yeah, they would constantly shoot at you.
So are these any of the Mountain Yard people?
Those are Mountain Yard people.
Yeah.
So Jim, you said that they were shot by the Vietnamese or the Viet Cong?
But the Mountain Yard people weren't considered part of the society for South Vietnam. They were considered hillbillies, kind of like what the Native American Indians were considered, 100 years ago. They were more than happy to push them off their land. And they were on the ocean, but when the Vietnamese came down, they pushed them up into the mountains. And as the population grew, they started going up into the mountains, started pushing them out of there. There's a lot of them in North Carolina right now. There's a whole village in North Carolina.
Some of the kids.
Those are just Vietnamese
Kids, yeah.
kids.
I think this next one's Mountain Yard.
Yeah, those are Mountain Yard. They're out farming. Those are more Mountain Yard people.
What crops did they raise,
They raised rice. They raised their own ducks. They raised pigs. They actually grew they had ponds, and they grew these bushes over the ponds. That they had silkworms. They actually grew their own silk. These silkworms would defecate into the water, and the carp in the water would eat that. And then mainly diet was, they ate monkeys and dogs and stuff like that. They ate pretty much anything they could find. They could dig up roots that we didn't know anything about, and they would eat them. And if you would eat them, you'd fall asleep for a couple of days. I know a couple of guys had that happen to them. It looked like a potato, they ate it, and they didn't wake up for 2 days.
Are the North Vietnamese the same thing as the Viet Cong? Is that the same?
No, that's the NVA is the North Vietnamese. The Viet Cong were homegrown freedom fighters, if you want to call them that, or homegrown communists, I guess you'd have to say. So they
weren't officially in their army. Like
No, they were
like guerrilla fighters.
They were in their particular kind of groups. But the Central Highlands had a whole different group of people than the rice people from the valleys.
This is one of your pictures, right?
Yeah, that picture I took. We're getting ready to drop down into the low country, getting ready to go. We're either going into Saigon or going over towards Quin Yan.
So is this the kind of truck you were in?
That's what they look like, yeah.
Okay, so you see the picture that he took, and now the next one is the kind of vehicle that they were on. So.
Yep, those were all handmade. We made our own vehicles.
Did you name them like this?
Yeah, we worked on them and we'd weld them back together after they would be all shot up. You had some parts, you'd have a junkyard. We only had deuce and halves, we didn't have, they said we had 5 tons, but I never saw a 5-ton. If we did, we wouldn't have parts for it.
So then there's a picture of
That's That's a 50 caliber. In the nighttime, we would build our own, we called them hand cannons. It was a single shot 50 caliber. In World War II, Korea and Vietnam, you couldn't aim a 50 caliber. You could shoot wildly, at which point you were probably burning up about 90% of your rounds. But with the scope we were putting on, guys would mail home for scopes, we were actually able to zero in a 50 caliber so you could knock something out at 300-400 yards.
Okay, so that's when you guys were over on the coast at one of the, like a depot or a supply run?
Yeah.
Okay, so here, this is,
If you have not read the book, this part is, Jim does a great job about interspersing the humorous moments into a very intense wartime story, right? So you have to appreciate some of the things these guys got up to. And this part, I'm going to read a little bit of this because it is just so funny.
why don't you tell about how, well, you talk about how hard these are, but so talk about these scopes for a second, and then I'll read this part.
Well, all right. We would go down country and we would try and sell these guns because we made them from other parts, and we'd try and sell them to the Marine Corps or to the Air Force. And to prove them, we'd go outside and shoot up what was ever moving around. We'd shoot out guard tower lights, we would shoot out fishing boat lights, and we'd bet on it. And when the betting went bad, we would just fight about it.
Here, I'll do this part.
So it says, with these scopes, we can actually aim these cannons. The range is 10,000 yards. The gun crew saw an empty table and walked over, and everybody's got, you know, like a nickname. Cowboy and Lefty moved their hand cannon onto the table and set it up on its base. Then the crew sat around with the barmaids. They were doing table service and talking to everyone, being very nice to our newbies. It was a good business for the saloon girls. They teased all the new soldiers and sat in their laps. These Madam Butterfly girls showed them lots of attention and much petting. It was like the Wild West. Everyone was a hardcore drinker and gunslinger, and only the dance hall girls wore silk. That's like a great line, only the dance hall girls. The bar was almost full and still more were coming in. Then the talk got real and turned to target practice. All the soldiers wanted to prove their skills. Sergeant Scheffler piped up, "Only way to really know how good these guns are is to try them out." Then they proceed to aim at all kinds of things they shouldn't be aiming at. So you're on a base, right?
Yeah, we're on a base overlooking the ocean.
I'm trying to think where this ends. So at the end of all of this, you did get caught, or you knew they were coming to, and you guys took off, right?
Yeah.
Tell me how that all went.
We were in the bar, and the fight broke out. The bartender pulled out an AK-47 and he fired it into the roof, telling us we were going to be arrested. And then the MPs came in and told us we were arrested. So we all took off for the back door, carrying whatever we could, and that included raiding the bar. And we left a lot of stuff that we shouldn't have left. But anyway, it was almost going to be daylight, so we just went back to our trucks and waited. And the MPs knew who we were. So we just decided to leave right away and get out of there. At which point we were still in the Navy Yard stealing anything we could. We actually had to borrow a couple trucks from them just to fill up everything. We had enough chicken and ham to have a big bonfire.
So tell us about some of your requisitioning that, it was sanctioned, right, by your superior officer?
Yeah, it was sanctioned by a guy by the name of Storeman Norman Shorts, who was actually Storeman Norman Schwarzkopf. Storm Norman Schwarzkopf, when he came back from Desert Storm, talked a lot about what he did on Mang Yang Pass. He was actually there, but he was only a captain at the time. And he was how I involved myself with the story about the bombing of Mang Yang Pass, how we outran a B-52 strike. He actually went through that.
So talk about that. That was incredible. That they called in a bomb strike while the convoy was going through the pass because they knew that would draw in the enemy and, right?
Storm Shorts actually went through a bomb strike coming back up Mang Yang Pass with full trucks. We were carrying fuel, artillery rounds, lots of artillery rounds, and all our vehicles were loaded down to the max, so we couldn't move that fast. So the Army wasn't even told about the B-52 strike, and the Air Force just kept coming. You could see lines in the sky where the B-52s were about to drop on us, and they did. That was a story from the Commander-in-Chief, Norman Schwarzkopf. Back then, he was only a captain.
Jim, how did they secure all the ammunition that you were, you know, driving through that pass and everything? That the enemy didn't come and blow up your trucks with all that ammunition? I mean, how did you procure that on a trailer or in what? How did you get it back?
Well, the deuce and a half, one of the 5-ton, solid frame 5-tons had side panels just like a normal cattle truck would have, and then we strapped all the ammo down onto pallets. It came pre-packed. All you had to do was move the pallet, and mortars actually came in wooden boxes. So if you had a pallet of mortars, you had like 10 boxes. Artillery shells came pretty much in the open, especially the bigger one. The 175 shells were separate. The gunpowder was separate from the round itself.
So what kind of, like how many trucks were in these convoys that would go back and forth to the coast?
Usually it was broken up between 10 reefers, 10 flatbeds, 10 fuel trucks.
So like this, is this one of the fuel trucks?
Yes, it is. That could be either hauling JP4, diesel fuel, or regular fuel. And we would actually add JP4 jet fuel to our diesel fuel when the vehicle was moving, because it gave the vehicle more power.
So I wanted you to talk about the trucks that so you are in the Army, but your trucks came from the Navy. How did that work? You had the trucks which is the same serial number, because they weren't using them, so you guys just took them?
Well, everybody was on stand down. The Navy was getting smaller, the Air Force was getting smaller, but the Army needed more trucks because they were still hauling all this stuff, and we were hard on the equipment. So if we were at a Navy pier, which is why we went down the Long Bend, they would have trucks just sitting on the dock. So all we had to do was go in and start them up. Some of them had a padlock, but we knew how to get through those. And we would just pick out a truck or two and haul it off. Sometimes we'd take a forklift. And we just hauled everything we needed up to Pleiku and used it. We were hard on equipment. We didn't have all the equipment we needed. Guys from Wally's Outpost would come up to us and say, hey, we need more of this, we need more shovels, we need more air conditioners, we need more generators. You guys got to get it to us because we can't get it ourselves. So we'd have our own shopping list. And if we had this Saturday night at the fight thing, guys would come in from all over and we'd resupply it. There was no profit. We were just doing it to keep the company running. And then we'd send out a half dozen self-propelled 175s to the fire bases, and we knew they had enough equipment to do it.
Can you explain what a fire base is?
Well, a fire base is like a hill they turned into a military fort. They put concertina wire around it, and they brought in 175 self-propelled howitzers so they could shoot into Cambodia. Some of them put out 155s. Those were self-propelled. We called them pigs because they were armored. They were a lot heavier, and they were slower. And then if they wanted, they could take out 105s. We layer lifted those out.
Okay, so I want to get an idea of how many miles that is. So they're shooting from one of these fire bases into Cambodia, but you're in the central part of Vietnam. How far?
No, we weren't in the central. We were on the edge of Vietnam.
So how many miles would that shoot?
From here to Beaver Dam would be Cambodia.
Still.
Not when you got a 105 or a 175 Howitzer that's got a 40-foot barrel.
So I want to ask you about the next picture. What is that helicopter bringing in?
That's a 105 going out.
I'm sorry if it's a repeat question, but were there a lot of things that were learned by the Army, by you guys on the ground, that were transferred to like the techniques in Iraq? Like because you were saying about how you would have to kind of rebuild a truck after it was all shot up, and like there were so many armored vehicles that weren't really armored at the beginning of the Iraq War. And like how you said you put jet fuel into the engines to make it go faster, like was that something that they kept doing, like, in combat zones, or?
I know when you added jet fuel, the motor had to be running, and you had to pour it into we call it a turbocharger. It was actually just a gravity flow into the injection system. And at one time we gave this kid a quart of jet fuel and gasoline. He thought it was great because he had flames coming out of his muffler. But then he complained about a half hour later how his motor burned up. So we had to go find him another motorcycle. And we did, we got him another motorcycle.
So the next picture is of a snake.
Yeah.
You have a story in this book about a tasty meal made out of some snake meat, yes?
Yeah, this snake was cooked up by the Koreans they had red onions, and they knew how to cook snake. And this was a big snake, so the steaks were huge. A 3-foot slice was all you could eat. They ate on that for 2 days.
And that was better than a lot of the food that you had.
Well, that was, the way they cooked it was delicious, because they knew how to, I think they boiled it in something, then they fried it with rice. Koreans ate a lot of rice and red onions.
So you also talk about the sea rations and that they were, like, how old they were. You want to talk about, like, the dates on some of those?
Yeah. The sea rations were left over from World War II. We were eating sea rations from the early 40s. And they were tasteless, believe me. You were eating cardboard. You could eat a 10-year-old pizza that tasted better than that.
There was a funny line in the book that, the age of the sea ration was directly inverse to how long it took to run through you, which you can imagine was true for you.
Yeah, that was one of our lines.
So
Jim,
tell me.
Jim, you said that the Koreans did the snake. So how many Koreans were there? Were they part of the U.S.?
Well, they were bridge guards. We were on the road going back up to Pleiku, and I was with O'Reilly, my sergeant, and he would trade with these Koreans. He would trade them a generator for something, maybe some war trophies or something like that. Anyway, we pulled into this one base, and they had a snake cooked up, and they gave us a big section of it. So we had lunch right with those guys.
So they were Koreans from South Korea then?
The other South Koreans, they were friendly. We were always really happy to be with the Koreans.
Okay.
They're gun crazy, but they would go out into the woods, up into the mountains, and they would just start shooting at anything. They would start fires as if they were trying to draw the North Vietnamese into them.
So did they actively fight on, the side with you guys, or were they just guarding bridges for the most part?
They had their own army, but they were mainly smaller groups. We didn't really fight with them, and we never went on patrol with them. But they had, each group always had a Korean that could speak English, because I couldn't speak Korean. Nobody could.
So throughout the book, you talk about some really great characters. You've got,
We talked about Captain Shorts already. Sergeant O'Reilly, tell us a little bit about him. He's got a fascinating story.
O'Reilly was from Ireland. From the Irish Army. At a young age, he went into the English Army. From the English Army, he got into the American Army. Still a young guy, he gets into the CIA, and he's running all these diversions, doing things, and he liked me because I would do something. He'd tell me, go over there and disconnect that, reconnect this. One time he had me climb up a pole with the cleats, with a couple pliers and a wrench. He said, disconnect these 3 wires up there. Turned out it was a 3-phase generator air conditioner. And he said, be careful, those are live wires. So here I am, I'm disconnecting these wires. I've never done it before. I'm hanging on this pole. And he's just saying, yeah, you're doing all right. But anyway, when I came down the pole, he promoted me. I was an E1 when I went up the pole. When I came down the pole, I was an E4. He gave me keys to a vehicle, which I didn't have a driver's license for. And he'd tell me, we're going to go over to the Air Force Base, go over to those buildings and get as many air conditioners as you can. And strip the wiring too. I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, well, I'm going over here and have breakfast. The Air Force had so much better stuff than we did. I mean, if he could have gotten away with a jet, he would have done it.
Sergeant O'Reilly in this picture, I'm not sure if he is.
No, he's not in that picture. Sergeant O'Reilly was, I never did get a photograph of him.
Okay.
He was a character though. I'd take him down to the airport. He'd be wearing fatigues, as we all did. And battalion would tell me, well, he's coming in tomorrow, go down to the airport and pick him up. He'd be in civilian clothes. And one time I took him to the airport. He said, I'm leaving. I'm going to Germany. See, never see you again. So he gave me the keys to his truck and his warehouse.
So I
He had a
like,
lot of stuff. He was there for 3 tours.
so you've got interesting names. You've got Cowboy, Shotgun Eddie, Lefty, Cowboy, Flunky. There's all kinds of interesting names.
Yeah.
Nicknames. right?
Smoking Joe's the black guy on the far left.
There you go.
The guy in the front on the right, that's Chico.
And these all, this is guys from your unit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Schaefer's not in there. I've got another picture of Schaefer. Gary Schaefer was from Indiana.
Shake it.
That's Gary Schaefer.
There we go.
We were talking one time about where I was from, and he said to me, I was at Hilda when it first opened. This is 70. Hilda opened in 68, and he'd already been there. So I never run into him again. I'd like to. He was quite the guy. He had a college degree, and they made him a clerk.
Oh, is he the guy who helps fix paperwork?
That's all he did.
I mean, like fix paperwork?
He had an accordion file no bigger than then a briefcase, and it held all your papers.
Right.
So he could type up anything he wanted. He could make you a colonel.
So, talk a bit about, you know, how, I mean, all the files are electronic now, right? But you had your own file, right? Paper,
201 file.
201 file. That wasn't the only time, did you get another promotion? It wasn't only the poll, like,
No, that was the only promotion.
Oh, okay.
Well, I was an acting sergeant, but that was just verbal.
oh, okay. But they would change, so if there were disciplinary orders, you want to mention about how they fixed some of those things?
Oh, yeah, if you got an Article 15 in the States for doing something, on your way overseas, you carried your 201 file with you, you could just open up your file and take it out, throw it away. And he would actually write up, if you wanted to be a couple grades higher when you got to your next base, he would write up orders for that. You'd have to pay him, but he would actually get you, he got this one guy disability for back problems, and he just did it. He paid him to him. He walked away with 20% disability. I don't know where he got the paperwork for that. That should have been with the doctors, but he had it.
All right, so this is your mascot for a while?
That's Tripod.
I'm assuming you lost your life?
That's the guy. The United States had a lot of German shepherds over there, and he was one of them. German shepherds would go out ahead of you, and they would be on point, and they could sniff up stuff you would never find. They could find military equipment that's been laying there for a couple of days, but they could find it. So they could tell you what was out there. And the sad thing about it was, when the trainers came home, they left the German shepherds over there. So there were German shepherds running around, and we'd get them into our perimeter and keep them, because we would use them. That was the one thing I could never figure out, why the United States wouldn't take those German shepherds back again. Because they spent a lot of money training them.
Yeah, that's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. So tell us, the next picture is a map that shows Burma, which is now Myanmar. And there's a very interesting story in the book about an expedition of sorts to spy on the Chinese during their Chinese New Year parades?
Yep, yeah. Actually, a guy, I was working for this guy, I was a carpenter, and this guy was living right outside of Ysena. This is 20 years ago. And he was fixing his house up because he was dying of brain cancer. He wanted his wife to have a good house when he left. And he sat down and he showed me these photographs and started telling me this story about how he had gone in with special forces, which he was in, and they had gone into Burma, and they would go up onto the Chinese border, and they would film and photograph the Chinese New Year's. And this was in the mid-60s. And when we were at the book club, this one guy starts telling me the story about he would be on an airplane, and they would fly over these areas recording any radio conversations they heard. They wanted to know what China was doing, and they would do it any way they could. That's really one of the only reasons we were in Vietnam, so we could get as close to China as we could.
Yeah, I'm gonna read this part, it's so funny about it. So at one point in this story, they have set up, their telescope, whatever, and they're like counting, the military that equipment that's in, because their parades are always just military equipment, and they realize that they pan over and the Chinese are looking right back at them, and then they took off quickly, and eventually, now when they met up with that other group of Chinese officer or Chinese soldiers,
it wasn't the same ones that were looking at them, or was it the same ones?
No, the second squad.
And this guy spoke perfect English, this captain in the Chinese military, and was just, happy to chat. And they had come here to school, right, and then went back to be in the military. And the captain continued, "China is beginning to open up its borders. My orders were to see you out of the country unharmed. We will help you carry out your equipment. My father was an officer in the Chinese army. For years he served his country. I'm going into government law in hopes of becoming an ambassador to your country. My background in schooling brings me here to you, and hopefully we have a happy meeting. Today my sister and two cousins are attending college in the States. One is going to Stanford and loves football games. When she returns, she will run a section of our government. One is going to Harvard and may not want to come home as she wants double citizenship. My young cousin is a party animal at the University of Wisconsin and does not want to come home." And I thought, I had no idea how prevalent it was, at that time, that there were that many Chinese students here that would then go back and end up in the military.
Mhm.
Did that surprise you? I mean,
Well, if you've ever been around Madison, you'll see there's lots of Chinese there. And they've been increasing over the years, but at first there was only like 5, 10 Chinese, and then 20, 30. Now there's hundreds of Chinese going to the University of Wisconsin. And these first ones were very sociable, and we found out that the Chinese people in general were pretty happy to be around Americans, because they wanted to be more sociable. It was actually the North Koreans we didn't like. North Koreans were the worst.
So, did each country in that region have their own language?
They were speaking English, the ones we saw.
But I mean, no, so you got, in Vietnam, you speak Vietnamese. If you cross over into Cambodia, is that a different language? You cross into Laos, is that a different language?
We were always speaking English. We didn't have much to do with the Laotians or the Burmese. The Burmese were really backwards. I mean, they had these deal where they put these rings around these ladies' necks, stretched their necks out, so their necks would be a foot longer, and that was considered a thing of beauty. There's actually photographs of it in encyclopedias.
They must have taken chances. They were sticking their necks out.
I guess if they took the copper rings off, their neck would fall over. I don't know if they still do it. This was back in the 60s and 70s. I think they probably want to be Americanized as much as anybody.
I would imagine there's some similarities between the languages, but, Vietnamese versus Cambodian or Thai, I don't have enough knowledge of that either to know for sure. But I would think there'd be some similarities. The other thing is there probably were indigenous languages too. Indigenous languages, like the Montagnards probably had a different language.
Yeah, their monies were all different. Thailand's money was actually what you were holding on to, because the Thailand money would actually have a strip of gold in it, or silver. And depending on what currency it was, how big the strip of gold or copper or silver was, you could actually hold it up and see the metal in it.
Is this part of your career, or is this just a general picture?
Oh, those are the guys that said goodbye to me.
This is when you were on the way out?
Yep, that's the last thing I saw. Those are the guys. There's actually 2 lieutenants in there.
Not the new captain who was so disgusted with all the things he found out. When he
No,
got
he didn't want to know us. This one guy was our payroll master,
Okay.
and if we wanted to get paid on the first of the month, we would have to go find him, because he'd be down somewhere. And this one Kepler who's got his head down knew where he was, and he'd go find him, sober him up, and get us paid. Because we got paid in paper money. It wasn't American money, it was military money that they made just for us.
I
And
had no idea.
when I was there once, so I think it was about 4 months into the service, I got put in a field hospital, and they did a money exchange. So the money I had was about $40, but it was worthless because the new money had come out, so I had to go into a money exchange and get it changed over. So all these Vietnamese that were holding on to American money, it was now worthless because they had no way of doing an exchange.
So this was special, like special currency, army currency, or?
Yeah, the money was about half the size of what our money was.
What did it look like?
It was all different colors.
But it was, the US military made it.
The military came up with their own money system.
I had no idea this was a thing.
Yeah, and they do a money exchange every now and then. So if these Vietnamese were holding on to thousands of dollars of our money, it was worthless the next day because the money exchange, they had no way of getting it. They couldn't take it to a bank and say, take it to me and exchange it. It was just funny money.
Yeah, that's, well, I learned.
They did have gold, but they didn't do much of a gold exchange. They had a lot of gold. I went into this one shop one time. I wasn't supposed to be there. And on the right side was 18 karat gold. On the left side was 20 karat gold, or 12 karat gold. And as you went further and further back into the gold shop, the bigger and bigger the bars of gold got. You could buy a piece of gold, looked like a Snickers candy bar. This was back when gold was like $16 an ounce, something like that. I wish I would have spent some money. I bought a couple of necklaces and sent them home to my two sisters, but I wish I would have bought a lot more. You would not believe the size of gold bars that place had. I mean, the guy had a couple of Doberman pinchers running around. You could hear them, but they didn't turn them loose until nighttime.
So I want to read this paragraph, this is funny.
This is when the new captain comes in, and I think it's fairly, close to the time, because it's near the end of the book of when you were going home, but Norman Shorts told me you men were a bunch of undisciplined, trigger-happy, loose cannons and a bunch of kleptomaniacs. He called you a very well-organized group of horse thieves and cattle rustlers, but you couldn't steal horses or cattle for the simple reason there were none to be found. And I see what he means. Half the trucks in our motor pool belong to the Navy and the Air Force.
That'd be about right.
Yeah, I just thought that was funny.
See, what we would do is we'd go out to the Navy base and we'd repaint the numbers on it.
Oh.
It would say 573rd United States Army, truck number 105. Next to it would be a truck that would say 573rd United States Army, truck number 105. Next to it would be another truck, United States Army, 573rd, truck number 105. That's how we got away with running them off. And the MPs would never get wise to the fact that the paint on the bumper was still wet.
So I'm going to ask you to tell us about Mrs. Billy.
Yeah, I wish he was still around.
And then this is him too, right?
And that's him when I first met him.
Gotcha.
Now, he was a Vietnamese boy. He lived in our barracks. I actually knew him because they sent me down to this barracks. That was going to be my sleeping quarters. And this little voice said, "Who are you?" And I looked down and here was this little Vietnamese kid, and I thought, well, his dad must have brought him in or his mother brought him in. Turned out he'd been on base for 5 years already. He spoke pretty good English, he spoke pretty good Vietnamese, and he was just learning about what was going on around him because he didn't know about the war, but he was learning about the war. And I think it was about July, maybe June, we took him down to the Catholic, it was kind of like a Catholic village. They had a big fence around their yard, everything was enclosed. At night they brought all their vehicles in, and Billy was learning how to speak and be trained in Vietnamese languages. We took him down on mattress and box springs and pillows and blankets, And they said, no, he can't have those. He's got to sleep on the ground just like we do. And then the South Vietnamese Army came in and started training him for the military, because they wanted him as an interpreter. So we figured he didn't get out. Because I wrote a couple letters and I never heard anything. And over there, they're so crooked you have to pay to get stuff done. You have to pay their way out. Until the end, I don't know what happened when Saigon fell.
So then, you came back, you were in Fort Hood for about a month. Did you come home right away after that, or what did you do?
Well, I went around, I came home, and I had these dog tags I took around to people that we all made these promises that you would take the dog tag to the family and tell them how it went and how his last days were. I did that to two situations. Went out in Long Beach, California, and went out to New Jersey, and I'll never do that again. They hated me. They did not like the fact I was standing there telling them about how their kid died. They were not happy about seeing me. They had rather seen me dead than their kid dead. So I quit doing that. I wish I'd never done it, actually. Really, it's a sad moment when you're trying to tell somebody how their son died. Anyway, after that, I moved out to Colorado. I lived out there for a couple of years, down in the Four Corners area. That's a beautiful area. I still got friends out there. Durango, Telluride, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, right through that area, Shiprock. It's a real beautiful area.
And then eventually headed back here, back home?
Yeah, I signed up to go to college, but they put me on a one-year waiting list, so I went back out to Colorado for another year. And then I came back to Madison and went to school. I wasn't very good at it. I couldn't have written this book without a laptop computer and a program called DragonSpeak. All you have to do is say the word and the computer writes it. Unbelievably good. I'd be on the second page if it weren't for that. I mean, I'd be looking at that. I'd pull out the dictionary and I'd look at that. That's not how you spell that word. I'd look it up in the dictionary and think, yeah, that is how you spell that word. And the computer knows more than I do.
Yeah, that was good technology for you.
Yeah, that was a big league. My daughter, who's not here, helped me with it. And when my wife was still alive, she helped me get it all set up. That was real helpful.
Well, it's a wonderful look into a really, really hard time in our history. And I learned so much. And you told the story in such an engaging way. So not only did I learn things, but I laughed along the way, which seems like a funny thing to say about a book that's a wartime book, but you made it such an engaging story. So.
Well, we weren't much to do with being in the military. We were the biggest bunch of crooks you ever seen in your life.
Did you have a question?
Jim, I wanted to ask, in your book you mentioned when the convoy went through the pass and you guys were being under siege almost, and they were trying to blow the tires and everything out of your vehicle so they would stop the progress. But in there you mentioned that the Vietnamese were up on top of the hill, and while you guys had gotten through the main part and you were leaving, that these guys were up there waving flags and taking their guns and saluting and everything. What did all that mean? I mean, how often did you have to go through this? Because that had to be a tremendous, I don't know what the word is. Somebody could help me out here.
Well, that only happened once, but that's when we figured out there was a major up there. And he was showing his power. He was up there with 500-600 men. And they would have these, the whole hilltops up there were just honeycombed with caves and underground eating quarters and stuff like that. It was like their city up there.
And they stayed there all the time then? They were just waiting for you guys to come through there every time and?
No, they would retreat back to another hill where they had the same situation, or they would retreat back even further. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was right there. And the Ho Chi Minh Trail looked like a bunch of deer trails. They looked like these off-road vehicle trails that you see now. They would actually take tree branches, pull them down over the pass and wire them down so they wouldn't come back up. So they could hide underneath these trails. And they actually had them so if it was a hot summer day, they'd go over to the other side of the hill and walk. But they had been up there for 20 years, so they had been situated out.
How often did you have to make the run back and forth?
Sometimes once a week, sometimes twice. We'd always stay down along the ocean because it was just more fun down in the ocean. And we didn't have NCO clubs or much down there, but you went down to the ocean, they had NCO clubs, and they had more nightlife. They actually had, one place had a theater. You could watch a movie. Up by us, all we had was a dugout with kerosene lamps.
Are there any other questions?
Have you ever gone back to Vietnam, or any thoughts about going back to?
No, I'm just a carpenter. I don't have that kind of money. I'm trying to pay my house off.
How did it feel to write this story and putting your experiences into it? This book, I mean.
Well, I was always gathering stories because I worked with lots of people. Some of the stories were actually told to me by our basic training sergeants, the very first people we met, because they were combat veterans. The story in here about how you could smell a soldier 50 feet away, that was told us by our basic training sergeants. And they were talking about, we didn't even have M16s back then. We were still battling with M14s. And they told us that, you guys listen up because you're going. And then stories started coming, like this guy I was talking about right outside of town, who told me a story about going into Burma and that. He had no reason to lie about it because he was dying of cancer.
Now, how many people came back with post-traumatic stress syndrome, or didn't they really know what that was at that point in time?
They probably didn't know about it. They did about the same as what they did with me. I got bailed out, or ETS'd out at Fort Lewis, Washington. Then they told me I had to go to Fort Hood, Texas, to get medical treatment. They gave me some travel money in that, but it was all off the record. I did it, and when I got down there, I found out there were a lot of veterans already down there.
Were they mainly just dealing with your physical ailments?
Yeah, they had physical stuff and just readapting to life. Like I was an apprentice to the Carpenters Union in Madison. And they told me, well, you didn't pay your dues while you're gone, so you're not in the union anymore. So I had to figure out what I wanted to do and, you know, come around to what you had to do.
Right.
You gotta do something for a paycheck.
Right. Other questions?
Is there another book in the future?
It's partly on the drawing board.
Oh, great.
It's how Saigon falls.
Okay.
See, the North Vietnamese wanted Pleiku, and they had to overrun us to get that. The Pleiku had the Vietnamese prison farm, which had a couple thousand prisoners, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. They wanted them. They wanted the airfield because they could bring their jets down from North Vietnam to Pleiku, and that's what they did too. And they wanted our tank farm because that's where all the fuel was. So we had 2 Corps, which had hundreds of men. We had the 173rd Airborne, which had about 500 guys. The Marines had all left, so we didn't have to deal with them. And then we had Artillery Hill right behind us. They had to fight for Artillery Hill. One time they hit our oil dump, and we had smoke everywhere. And there would be 50-gallon containers of oil flying through the air on fire.
I want to say thank you for doing this and for writing this book, because I'm still, you know, when I was in high school, and that's a while ago now, you know, like it was recent American history, right, in the 90s, and so I think it's so important that this history continues to be shared with our communities and with our young people, so thank you for doing this so much.
Well, I came from a good family, a big, good family, so they kind of took me under their wings, and were very capable of kicking my ass when I was out of line. That included my father, and I had a couple older brothers.
Hey, who was the genius that, oh, I'm sorry, that figured out to put that jet fuel in there?
They were doing that the whole time I was there. They actually had a copper tube, went from behind the driver up in the gun box, and it went down into the carburetor, or not, the fuel injection system, and they would pour the jet fuel in there until the motor sounded good. It was the military's truck, we didn't worry about it.
Go steal another one.
Oh yeah, we went through a lot of stuff. We had a boneyard, we'd go out and pick over stuff, and we went through brakes and tires and stuff like that. That's why we'd have to go down to Long Bend and steal Air Force vehicles. They were downsizing, they didn't need them. They had jets sitting around, helicopters sitting around. They had a helicopter sitting out there with missiles on it, and we were looking at what we could do with that. Sergeant O'Reilly got one of them.
Was there another question?
Heard stories about it as recently as Afghanistan, when the military pulls out, they just leave equipment, leave everything. Was that the way it was when the Marines left and the Air Force left?
At the very end it was. While we were up there, we were actually hauling our scrap iron down to the ocean. We were putting it on ships and taking it out. Because we had this one pile of 175 Howitzers, and that was a 40-foot barrel. And they'd stack those up on top of flatbeds and haul it down country and take it back out with it. And we'd have any old piece of junk laying around, we took it back. We actually would pick up our brass cartridges because we didn't want the North Vietnamese to have them, because they would melt them down and do something with them. But it was not only them, it was the civilians. One time these Vietnamese came up to us, they were mountain guard, and they wanted us to come over and look at this piece of metal that they were going to hammer on and break apart and use the metal for something. And we went over and looked at it. They were going to start hammering on this 500-pound bomb. We told them, no, don't do that when we're here. They were going to knock it down.
You said don't do that when we're here, or just don't do that at
I
all?
told them don't do that. They were going to start, it didn't explode because it hit a couple trees and came down sideways. And ordnance didn't blow it up because they didn't know it was there. So these guys were going to take a hammer and pound on it until they got it apart. Good idea, right?
I'm surprised to hear that they hauled scrap metal and stuff out of there. I know when the Red Arrow Division was sent out to Washington, and then they decided they didn't need them, you know. I heard stories about they just took bulldozers, make a big hole and dump all kinds of equipment in it and cover it up, and that was it. They're cheaper than hauling the stuff back home, they figured.
They did that in Denver too, when they closed the, where they were making nuclear weapons. They had drill presses and metal lathes and stuff like that. They dug a hole and buried them. And this guy from around here, Donnie Will, put a couple of them on the back of his pickup and hauled them home. He's got a metal working shop in his basement now. He said it was better than watching them get buried. And that's all they did.
Jim, in your book, you said that on one of those convoys that there was one truck that went over the side and the guys had jumped out of there. And you said that I don't know if it was the helicopters or had to go back in there to pick up that piece of equipment that had fallen off the roadway. I mean, that had to be a job and a half.
Yeah, you had to use a skyhook. Skyhook was the biggest chopper they had. And after they got it back up to the road, they would bring in what they call it, a tank recovery vehicle. It was an armored, I've got a picture of one. It's an armored vehicle, it doesn't have a gun. It got 1 mile per gallon, and it was geared down to pull anything. And they would pull out vehicles with that thing. Tank retriever, it was called. It could actually pull a tank home.
I'm a member of the VVA, and as of a couple of years ago, I became a member, and the recent publication came out about recovering some MIAs. 2 of them that just came back recently, and their families finally put it to rest, that found their sons and brothers. And there's I'm from Kewaskum, there's a man that still hasn't been found. His name is James Voelker. He was a Marine Corps pilot. And get any feel as far as how many MIAs are still over in Vietnam now?
It's hard to say. I haven't kept up with any of that. But, life over there wasn't as valuable as it is over here. We would actually be going down the road in trucks, and there'd be a dead person laying alongside the road. Later on, you'd be driving back the other way, that dead person would still be there, but his boots would be gone. And his weapon would always be gone. Anything, I'm sure they frisked him and found out if he had any money on him. That's the way that life was over there.